headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Let's talk about the freedom marches because it's a big story in Canada, big story in New Zealand, you know, where these two left-wing liberal leaders turned into fascistic dictators. Justin Trudeau, absolutely apoplectic about these people protesting in a free society. They just want their freedom back. They want their lives back. Justin Trudeau says they're all anti-vaxxer Nazis. No, they're not. They're absolutely not. And what is his latest manoeuvre to quell this tide of rebellion? He has moved to freeze all their bank accounts. What on earth does he think he's up to?
Don't they make being liberal and left-wing unattractive? I mean, I'm going to say something specifically about Trudeau, actually. He's my anti-Valentine. Yesterday was Valentine's Day. There should have been love in the air, and he's just spread tyranny through the air in Canada. I mean, here he was, this handsome liberal leader of a country, and the mask has really slipped, hasn't it?
Yeah, handsome on the outside, not so. He's like Dorian Gray, hideous on the inside.
Yeah.
Let's have a quick look at a video I think we've got of the Freedom Convoy.
With each illegal blockade, local law enforcement agencies have been acting to keep the peace within their jurisdiction. Despite their best efforts, it is now clear that there are serious challenges to law enforcement's ability to effectively enforce the law. On Friday, Ontario invoked a state of emergency to respond to the blockades. This was the responsible and necessary thing to do. Today, to continue building on these efforts, the federal government is ready to use more tools at its disposal to get the situation fully under control. After discussing with Cabinet and caucus, after consultation with premiers from all provinces and territories, after speaking with opposition leaders, the federal government has invoked the Emergencies Act to supplement provincial and territorial capacity to address the blockades and occupations. I want to be very clear. The scope of these measures will be time-limited, geographically targeted, as well as reasonable and proportionate to the threats they are meant to address.
And meanwhile, Laura, down in New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern turns high-powered hoses onto the demonstrators. These people, I mean, Trudeau, he's a fascist. He's the enemy of freedom. You're allowed to demonstrate in a free democracy, aren't you? What does he think he's talking about there?
Do you know, I think he's got hurty feelings, Kev. The thing is, the Truckers' Freedom Convoy captured the world's hearts. He's called the protesters every name in the book.
Nazis and anti-vaxxers.
Yeah,
they're
anti-vaxxers.
not Nazis and they're not anti-vaxxers. There may be one or two Nazis, there may be one or two anti-vaxxers. But by and large, the vast majority of those protesters, just like the freedom marches in London and around the country, they just want their lives back. They want their freedom back.
Well, of course they do. I mean, he's also called them misogynist and racist. You know, the thing is, the cat's out of the bag because we've seen the footage. We've seen that they are all ethnicities. They're just ordinary working class people who are against mandates and restrictions, not specifically anti-vax. We've also seen the footage of people singing and dancing in the streets. This has been an incredibly peaceful protest. I suspect that Trudeau wanted it to turn nasty and violent, and that would have served his purposes really well. But how amazing that such a large protest has stayed so peaceful, because there's always a few bad apples. I mean, when I see that clip, I find it really disturbing. He's giving this facade of being really in control and calm, but there's something that's quite creepy and contained about it. And I think that he's quite a dangerous individual, actually, because he's been deliberately inciting division and discord in his nation. You know, you come through a pandemic and what you should be doing is seeking recovery and peace. And what he's actually doing is trying to whip up public condemnation. So yesterday, he invoked the Emergency Powers Act, and that is the first time...
Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah, but you know what? It's the first time in Canada's history. Now, there's been a really mixed response to this, and I suspect it's going to be something that Canada's media and the world's media is going to be dissecting for weeks, was it overreach or not? So some businesses really welcomed it because, of course, the convoy is going to disrupt business, it's going to affect the Canadian dollar. But the Canadian Civil Liberties Association has said that they don't believe he had the grounds to invoke it. And I think it's obvious to most right-thinking, genuinely liberal people around the world that trying to freeze bank accounts, this is corporate bank accounts, so we should say, and also to withdraw insurance licences from truckers who are peacefully protesting is overreach. This is, what an awful thing to be remembered for, and this is what he'll be remembered for.
And what does he think he's fighting? He's fighting Omicron. This is a mild variant that, if you catch it, it'll give you the sniffles for a couple of days. The death rate is virtually negligible, and this is not a serious condition. I can't understand the mindset all over the world. We've got to fight Omicron. No, you don't. You don't have to. What does he think he's doing?
But I think he's really one to watch. I think there's something quite dangerous unfolding here. The fact that he looks very contained, also his use of language is extremely deliberate. You'll notice he keeps using very nationalistic language, and he talks about keeping Canadians safe. As you say, we're talking about keeping them safe from Omicron.
The sniffles. Mm-hmm. We don't need governments to save us from the sniffles. I've been saying this since December to our government. They've seen sense about it now. Other governments around the world, and it's not just Canada and New Zealand, obviously. France is a shocker for it. They're throwing everything into a battle against the sniffles. It's crazy.
Yeah, he's power hungry. It is crazy. So the other thing they're trying to do is subvert ideas that would normally appeal to liberals. So, trying to describe the protesters as misogynist and racist, well, you might fall for that until you see the footage, and then you see they're every ethnicity in Canada represented. There's nothing misogynist about them. His deputy yesterday, in her announcement, said follow the money. So that's something that people say when they think that there's some devious money-making plot. Well, the truckers are not making money from doing this.
Blokes in lorries. They're not
yes.
Follow the money. That won't get you to truckers.
No, but what they're trying to do is justify freezing accounts. The money that you should really be following is the fact that they don't want the economy disrupted by the convoy. And probably, there may be some pharmaceutical lobbying going on here as well about vaccines. I'm just going to throw that one out here. So using follow the money is supposed to get people on side who would not normally be on side with the idea of bank accounts being frozen. The other thing I want to say about these bank accounts being frozen is if you support this, if you support bank accounts and insurance being taken away, you may as well say, come in, Chinese, and set up a social credit system for us. This shows the danger of governments being able to touch your money. So right here in the UK, we're going to be consulting on programmable central bank digital currencies. So that's where your money can be controlled based upon your identity. It's a really dangerous precedent. And it's where you have to be very careful. People in this country have said they would like Extinction Rebellion and insulate Britain's bank accounts frozen because they find them annoying when they're protesting. But we have to respect people's individual rights, their money, their property. And I think the world's going to be watching what they're doing here with freezing bank accounts.
Indeed, and as I say, what is this all about anymore? It's getting kind of weird and sinister. I mean, as I say, Boris Johnson, credit to him. Don't say he's entirely responsible for his own decision. He was dragged kicking and screaming into this common sense viewpoint he now has. There is no point in putting up a massive fight against a mild variant that doesn't really do any harm. Other countries around the world are still in the thick of it. They're still saying, we've got to battle this fight. Why? Why?
Isn't it crazy that, I don't want to be grateful for the restrictions being lifted here. I'll never let myself be grateful for something that shouldn't have been imposed and has gone on too long. They're well past their sell-by date. But, all of our restrictions being lifted at a time when they're freezing bank accounts in Canada, turning water cannons on people. You've got police using truncheons and tear gas in Paris. Australia thinks they need quarantine camps. What's going on in these different countries, in these different responses? It's quite bizarre to watch.
You think we were fighting the bubonic plague and people were falling dead in the streets? Of course, a year ago when it was Delta, that was a fairly deadly form of the virus. But even then, the death rate was pretty low. In pandemic terms, globally, this isn't much of a pandemic. I mean, the last major pandemic this world had was 100 years ago, just after the First World War, and 50 million people died around the planet. And this time, what are we talking? It's not even 2 million yet, is it? So, I mean, don't get me wrong, every death is a tragedy, of course. And when yesterday we heard that the most recent death toll was 35 in a day, the tendency is to go, 35, that's nothing. Well, that's 35 tragedies. So I'm not trying to undermine the importance of every death, but 35 deaths in a day in a population of 67 million, to carry on throwing everything at fighting that virus is absolute insanity.
Well, you talk about what we're fighting, and I think actually, let's turn our gaze in a different direction. We're not fighting the pandemic. The real fight now is against tyranny, and it's a fight to preserve liberal democratic values, and we're seeing which countries uphold those and which countries fall. And right now, it looks like Canada's falling. And the way he keeps using language like safety and Canadian people and trying to create division is something to watch, because that's happened before and it doesn't end well.
Good talk. Hot talk.
Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.